Chinese fighters intercept a U.S. plane in the South China Sea. Then this happened. It's becoming increasingly clear that China will challenge U.S. global leadership in the first half of the 21st century. Confrontation between these nations seems inevitable, and it's intensifying. One of the most visible arenas of this standoff is in the South China Sea. This region holds significant strategic importance as a third of the world's maritime traffic, including oil, natural gas, and other valuable resources, passes through its waters. China, claiming a large portion of the South China Sea, has increased its military presence on disputed islands, building bases and strengthening its positions. In response, the U.S. and its allies have stepped up patrols, supporting freedom of navigation and reaffirming their commitment to international law. If the U.S. concedes to China in the South China Sea dispute, it'll continue retreating, eventually falling from its pedestal as the world leader. Understanding this, China constantly provokes the U.S. in this area, whether by sending its military vessels dangerously close to U.S. ships or intercepting American naval aircraft. In this video, we'll explore what could happen if a Chinese fighter intercepts a U.S. Navy plane and the potential consequences of such an incident. The South China Sea isn't just 1,365 square miles of water. It's one of the planet's strategic hotspots, where every mile in each small island holds billions of dollars and tons of oil. China has long positioned itself as the dominant power here, establishing powerful military bases on artificial islands and increasing the activity of its naval forces in the region. Beijing openly claims these waters as its own, dismissing the historical and legal claims of other nations. For the U.S., the situation is clear. The South China Sea falls under international law, and China's attempt to turn it into a private lake is a direct challenge. Under the banner of freedom of navigation, U.S. military vessels and planes regularly patrol disputed territories, signaling their refusal to yield to Beijing's provocations. But with every flight and patrol, the risks increase. Two nuclear powers, one aiming to establish regional dominance, the other maintaining the balance, are separated only by a few hundred meters and split seconds from direct military confrontation, a standoff that could lead to a nuclear war with catastrophic consequences for the entire planet. The frequency of aerial patrols and incidents is at an all-time high, turning the skies over the South China Sea into a powder keg. One wrong maneuver, one misstep, and an accidental collision could escalate into a full-scale armed conflict with global repercussions. Before discussing the consequences of any risky maneuver or miscalculated decision, let's introduce the main players in this escalating rivalry. When Chinese and American aircraft encounter each other over the South China Sea, it's more than a visual standoff, it's a clash of technology and ambition. From China's side, intercepting forces typically include fourth-generation fighters such as the J-11, based on the Soviet Su-27, and the J-16, its modernized variant. The U.S. in turn often deploys Lockheed EP-3 reconnaissance aircraft adapted from the P-3 Orion patrol plane, used to intercept and analyze electronic signals, and the Boeing RC-135, a large strategic reconnaissance plane for real-time intelligence gathering. These planes typically fly out of U.S. military bases in Guam, Japan, and the Philippines. Over decades of rivalry, there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of aerial incidents between Chinese and American aircraft. The most dangerous occurred in April 2001 when a Chinese J-82 fighter collided with a U.S. EP-3 reconnaissance plane over the South China Sea. The Chinese pilot's reckless actions led to the fighter's crash into the sea. His body was never recovered. The second Chinese fighter forced the U.S. pilot Shane Osborne to land his heavily damaged plane on China's Hainan Island, where the crew was detained by Chinese authorities for 11 days. In a more recent incident on May 17, 2016, two Chinese J-11 fighters intercepted an American EP-3 over the South China Sea, approaching within about 50 feet, 15 meters. On December 21, 2022, a Chinese J-11 came within just 20 feet, 6 meters, of a U.S. RC-135, forcing it to take evasive action to avoid a collision. On May 2, 2023, a J-16 flew directly in front of a U.S. RC-135, causing it to enter a turbulent layer and change course. Just a few months later, on October 24, 2023, a dangerous incident unfolded as a Chinese J-11 approached a U.S. B-52 strategic bomber to within 3 meters, about the distance you'd watch a movie on your home TV. There's little doubt these incidents will not only continue but also increase. For China, it's crucial to show its readiness to respond to intrusions in its waters, while the U.S. cannot allow Chinese fighters to dominate the skies. In these conditions, the airspace becomes a dueling ground where peaceful outcomes grow more illusory with each encounter. When a Chinese fighter roars through the sky intercepting a U.S. aircraft, every second becomes a high-stakes moment where the prize isn't just national pride, but regional peace. Reactions in these moments vary, but they revolve around several scenarios, from relative calm to catastrophic escalation. The first scenario is a passive intercept. A Chinese fighter approaches the U.S. aircraft to demonstrate presence, but keeps a respectful distance, avoiding provocation. This passive intercept serves as a polite, albeit thinly veiled reminder that Chinese forces are monitoring the situation and are prepared to respond if the U.S. crosses an invisible line. This scenario is likely in a politically restrained environment, allowing China to assert its control over the airspace without posing a direct threat. The second scenario is aggressive escorting. In an aggressive escort, the Chinese pilot comes much closer, cuts off the U.S. plane's path, or creates turbulence by flying close alongside. In the sky, where speeds are high and maneuvers require precise skill, such actions can lead to errors on either side. Here, China's attempting to show it'll not tolerate uninvited guests, using intimidation tactics that the U.S. may interpret as a willingness to provoke. The risk of collision or accidental fire is significantly higher, with even the slightest deviation potentially leading to severe consequences. The third scenario is blockade. This more extreme but not unimaginable scenario sees the Chinese fighter blocking the U.S. aircraft's path and forcing it to change its route. If the Chinese pilot assumes the authority to act as a patrol officer and demands the Americans land at the nearest military base, it could be seen as a shocking provocation. In response, the U.S. might decide to deploy fighters or send warships to protect its interests. If Chinese forces try to dictate the route or actions of a U.S. aircraft, it'd be one of the most dangerous incidents in the history of the South China Sea tensions. Lastly, there's the most alarming scenario, escalation to combat. This darkest scenario, one that likely haunts the entire region, unfolds if a provocation turns into actual fighting. One wrong move, a shot fired, or a misinterpretation of actions could lead to a Chinese fighter to strike an American plane or vice versa. Escalation would then reach a new level. The U.S. might respond by immediately scrambling fighters from nearby bases, activating its navy, and even mobilizing allies. China, in turn, would raise its forces, plunging the region into open conflict. An accidental or deliberate clash would spark a propaganda war, with each side casting the other as the aggressor to win global support. Any of these scenarios would bring humanity one step closer to disaster. Considering the U.S. Navy frequently operates in the South China Sea, it's clear these intercepts will continue. With each encounter, the chance that one might push humanity to the brink of nuclear war only grows. Yet both China and the U.S. see these incidents as challenges to which they must respond, either through diplomacy or by escalating. How will the U.S. and China react to a dangerous incident involving an intercept over the South China Sea? The answer will depend on each country's interests and willingness to take risks. In the event of an accident, China is likely to respond firmly, presenting itself as a victim of U.S. aggression, while accusing Washington of provoking it in a region deeply embedded in Chinese history. Beijing might launch a media campaign accusing the U.S. of violating Chinese territorial rights and warning of repercussions. China's statements will be sharp, aiming to show the world it won't back down in the South China Sea. China could also bolster its military presence in the region, increasing the number of ships and planes around disputed areas. This would apply pressure not only on the U.S., but also signal to neighboring countries, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, that China is willing to raise the stakes to defend its interests. Beijing could further appeal to international bodies such as the UN, accusing the U.S. of using force and disrupting peace in Asia. From the U.S. side, the response would be equally powerful and calculated. Washington can't afford to show weakness, especially when American dominance over other countries no longer appears absolute. The White House might issue a harsh statement condemning China's actions, accusing it of trying to seize control of international law. The next step would likely be increasing U.S. presence in the area, more patrols, naval deployments in the South China Sea, and new aerial missions to show Beijing that America won't back down. The U.S. would also seek to rally its allies in the region. Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Southeast Asian nations may be invited to participate in joint naval exercises aimed at bolstering regional security and curbing Chinese aggression. Washington may ramp up its rhetoric in international organizations, portraying China as the aggressor and seeking global support. If both sides continue escalating, the world could face a new diplomatic crisis. China and the U.S. would trade accusations, each framing the other as the aggressor threatening stability in Asia. This conflict could draw in other nations forced to choose sides, with ASEAN countries like the Philippines and Vietnam balancing the risks of Chinese pressure and the security benefits offered by the U.S. The diplomatic standoff would create global instability, especially in Asia, as concerns about a potential conflict affect currency markets and stocks of major corporations. Oil and gas routes through the South China Sea, critical to the world economy, would face threats, impacting the global market. In addition, the U.S. might impose sanctions on Chinese companies and key military officials involved in the incident, signaling to Beijing that disrupting the international order will have severe consequences. Sanctions could target companies involved in infrastructure projects on disputed islands, harming China's economic interests. In turn, China could respond by leveraging its own economic power, limiting exports of rare earth elements, and imposing sanctions on American companies within China. There's also one crucial element tied to China's aggressive intercepts of U.S. military aircraft, perhaps the most critical. Beijing has openly expressed its desire to seize Taiwan for China.
领土完整，反对台独的坚强决心和强大能力。
Taiwan is more than an island. It's an inseparable part of its history, culture, and political ambition, which it's determined to bring under control. Taiwan symbolizes China's national project, which remains incomplete until the island returns to its fold. While this goal is seen as inevitable in China, the only thing holding Beijing back is the risk of a massive conflict with the U.S., potentially sparking a destructive war. China knows that losing Taiwan would be a strategic blow for the U.S., undermining its influence in the Asia-Pacific and its security architecture in the Indo-Pacific. By supporting Taiwan, America maintains a key position in the region, serving as a barrier to Chinese expansion. Understanding this, China tests the U.S. in the South China Sea, each intercept and maneuver around U.S. allies, probing Washington's resolve to defend its interests. Through these provocations, China cautiously gauges America's response, looking for any sign of weakening. If the U.S. response slows, reduces military exercises, or declines to confront provocations, Beijing will see it as a green light to pursue its ambitions. Should China sense that the U.S. is retreating, a historic decision could be made to reunite with Taiwan through force. Each encounter in the South China Sea is not just a local incident, but part of a larger game China plays against the U.S. It's a test of both strength and willpower. The U.S. must maintain its presence in the South China Sea to prevent Beijing from interpreting restraint as weakness. Otherwise, the loss of Taiwan could lead to a collapse of U.S. dominance in this region and beyond. So what do you think could happen if Chinese fighters aggressively intercept American aircraft? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We appreciate your likes and subscriptions to our channel, and we'll see you soon.